Start in about 5 minutes, right at 15 after. Okay?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Before we start, I'd like to ask that everyone make sure your cell phones are off. There's almost nothing more embarrassing than having a cell phone go off during a celebration of life for someone. So thank you for taking care of that. I want to welcome everyone today to the beautiful home of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Salem and the celebration of life for our dear friend Barbara Ross. I'm Craig Morrow, minister of Y East UU congregation in Portland, where Barbara was a member. So why is Barbara's celebration happening here today? Y East congregation has no building of its own. So we knew that we'd have to choose an alternative site, one that would be centrally located for family and friends and the many, many people who knew Barbara throughout her long career as she worked to make all of our lives better. We realized that our state capital, that the UU Church on Center Street, right in the center of the state of Oregon, administratively, was the perfect place. So once again, welcome. Let me start by sharing a few memories of Barbara from the people who knew her in her later years as a member of our small congregation. I can say without hesitation that she was the personal hero for many of us, myself included. But that's a general statement, and Barbara was all about specifics. So here are some from our members, some comments. For me, Barbara's greatest gift was her ability to see the potential for good in people, expose those hidden jewels, and empower people to put those gifts to work. She would bring confidence and enthusiasm in people, leading them to new growth and accomplishment. Certainly, she was a restless soul, using her energy to make the world a better place, and she did. She was a gracious host for our senior potluck gatherings after services and several smaller dinners at her apartment over the Hollywood Library. Her social justice work was an inspiration, and she was always ready to cheer on any work that the rest of us were doing to make the world a better place. She struck a perfect balance between sharing what was going on in her life and listening to what each of the rest of us were doing. She had both charm and social grace. But most of all, I remember her sense of humor and the way she could make you feel that you were someone important. Another recalls how when Barbara's husband Joe was nearing death, she would go over and read poetry to both of them. She also recalls how Barbara also wrote poetry herself, poems of real depth. And I see some people nodding who must have seen her poems. Barbara and I met many times over the 6 years that I was her minister, either at a coffee house or at her home over the Hollywood Library. She always had a specific topic that she wanted to discuss and a few clear questions for me. Once these had been covered, she was done. She sometimes had a folder that she would fold, and we would part without further ado. Does that sound like Barbara? I hardly need to ask, do I? One time, we were joined by a young man who is deeply committed to following a political career like hers and impacting people's lives for the better. It may be that he was expecting, when he joined us for coffee, a few encouraging words from a nice old lady. What he got was something more, as she questioned him about his experience, his next steps, and how he planned to take them. I could see him straighten up and get ready for the rest of his life, right? When Barbara called me to her home for what I knew would be our last conversation, we didn't dwell much on that fact. We talked about many things, past, present, and future. We talked about the people in her family, those with us today whom she loved and who loved her so deeply, and also about her grandfather, a minister who'd built a Methodist church in Texas. Levi Tenney, right? Levi Tenney. Presbyterian. Oh my gosh, you never want to make that mistake. Wow. And I kind of see Lehi Tenney, except without the beard, here sitting here in John, for sure. Well, she showed me a sermon that Levi had written and that she'd recently found, and I said that I hope to read it someday. When it was time for me to go, I said that I would miss her, and I mentioned that she was the person from church whom I talked about most to my family. And she asked, "Well, what do you say about me?" I said that I told them that she was like a chess master who sees things steps ahead, many more steps than most of us do, and connects them with so many steps behind that most of us might have forgotten. We hugged once, and then I left with a lump in my throat. Something must have gotten in my eyes, so I rubbed them before getting on my bike, and then when I rubbed my eyes, I saw this image of Barbara walking a path or a sidewalk that looked like a chessboard with dark and light squares, reaching forward and back and branching with paths and sidewalks in all directions, and smiling softly. Peaceful, but determined, always moving toward a goal. And now we'll see some more images from Barbara's life. There's the images up here, and if those aren't clear for you, you could turn and look at the screen and back as well.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm Leota Goodney. I am Barbara's youngest sister. Barbara grew up in Kerrville, Texas, a small town where our father owned a dairy. My mother reported that she was smart, but she was flighty and forgetful. She was also, as Craig mentioned, and you all know, she was always interested in people, and she had an active social life, much to the chagrin of her immediate older sister, Kate, who was more straightforward. When she was 13, she went to summer camp, and her name was Barbara Neely at the time. She had no middle name, but she told everyone that her name was Carol. And so for many years afterwards, occasionally somebody would call up and ask for Carol. I was born not long after, when she was 14, and my mother and father named me Leota, but they hadn't come up with a second name. And Barbara insisted that I should have some nice plain name so that when I got to be 13 and didn't like my name, I would have something to change to. So my name is Leota Ruth. Barbara taught me to climb trees. I have a very vivid memory of her standing out there on that long branch, and I was supposed to walk out to her on the branch with nothing to hold on to, and I said, no, I don't think I'm going to do that, but she was perfectly comfortable out there. I also remember that when she was in nursing, she was either in nursing school or she was working as an LPN, and she was working nights, and whether she invited me down or whether my mother thrust me up on her, I do not know, but she was in her early 20s and I was like 8 or 9 or something like that. And I stayed with her for a whole week. She was working nights, and so she had a jar of things that I could choose to do while she was sleeping, so as to not give her a little bit more time to sleep. She also, when I was little, she sent me letters from wherever she was, and she would put pictures in for some of the words so that I could read them. We grew apart because she went on with her life. She had a family and a career, and I was busy being a teenager and a college student and starting my own career. So it was there were many years that we didn't have much correspondence at all. But in later years, after our mother died in 1984, she began to take on the role of the person who knew everything that was going on in the family. And as Craig alluded to, and as I'm sure you have all experienced, Barbara was intensely interested in every person she met. They came from all walks of life, and she always knew, she could remember, which was a fascinating thing to me, what everybody was doing, what was going on in their life, and she was really, really interested. She was a good friend to all of our siblings, to our oldest sister, as she went through Alzheimer's in her last few years, to our brother Roy through all the vicissitudes of his life, and through her next older sister, Kate. Though Mother reported that they fought like cats and dogs as teenagers, they were close friends in later years. We became close again over the last few years, probably 5 or 10 years. We began to communicate much more frequently, and during the last 4 or 5 years, we have talked at least weekly. We shared an interest in gardening, we shared an interest in politics, and she was a really good friend to me. And I will miss her.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Alita, and Barbara Ross was a mentor and a friend. Her heartfelt care and concern for people with special needs was evident in how she listened to their stories and responded with compassion and action. And as Sarah Gelser-Blauen, who's here today, mentioned in an email to colleagues and friends, quote, Barbara Ross never stopped working, never stopped driving others to make things happen, and never lost her focus on why she was doing what she was doing, to lift the voices that needed lifting. Barbara's legacy of influence in Corvallis grew out of the many hats she wore as a community leader. To name a few, Benton County Board of Commissioners, Corvallis School Board, Oregon House of Representatives, League of Women Voters, and yes, she did wear several hats simultaneously. Imagine that. Barbara's social work background seemed to be the lens through which she looked at the world. Some of my best memories of Barbara are from time spent at her house looking out her front window on Jefferson Street. We talked about the people we observed who were houseless and or some kind of trauma mode. We called them by name and reflected on how a system change was needed to provide them dignity and self-worth. Barbara's dining room table was often the scene of mailing parties, addressing and stamping newsletters and event invitations, generally with well-worded appeals for money donations. In the early days of both Corvallis Homeless Shelter Coalition, now called Housing First, and Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, Barbara's support, wisdom, and skill sets were critical. For Housing First, Barbara's state agency connections and networking skills helped pave the way in 2010 to acquiring funding for Partners Place, an 8-unit apartment building providing permanent supported housing for 14 individuals. Today, Corvallis Housing First has 5 properties providing housing for over 60 individuals. In partnership with Unity Shelter, CHF is currently providing case management to 150 plus individuals in congregate sheltering and at 3 micro-shelter locations. For the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, Barbara's creative social worker brain found a place to plant some awesome social justice seeds. One example was the cleanup team. In 2009, she recruited over 30 folks who were homeless or low-income individuals to perform odd jobs around town. And to kick off the team, Barbara's marketing strategy was to have folks march in the Corvallis 4th of July parade carrying a banner and having rakes and shovels over their shoulders. Barbara's initiation of the cleanup team was the seed for HELP, our current homeless employment launching project. This year, we have had over 40 individuals with background checks sharing a variety of skills to members of our community. Working for HELP is the first step in creating a work history and often leads to launching into more permanent employment. After moving to Portland in 2011, Barbara continued to be engaged with the mission and vision of the Drop-In Center. Barbara remained connected through regular calls and visits. She always provided a solid mentorship. On Tuesday, March 22nd, Sue Schultz and I were able to visit with Barbara in her Portland home. Her gracious hospitality was going strong. Before we left, she pointed out a collection of necklaces displayed on her wall, and we were instructed to take one. Well, we did, of course, and this is the one that I chose. So shortly after Barbara died, Sarah Gelser-Blauen and I had a self-care chat at Susan's Coffee and Garden Shop. And we reminisced about how Barbara always had a list for each of us, and probably most of you all here today. As Sarah said, we will look forward to seeing how Barbara sends to-do lists from the other side of the Rainbow Bridge. The next day, Sarah was on her way to Washington, D.C. It seemed appropriate for her to take along Barbara's necklace, and she agreed. Well, this evening, my husband and I will be flying to D.C. I am looking forward to participating Saturday in the Mass Poor People and Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington and to the polls. Saturday's march will be a historic gathering like the 1968 Martin Luther King March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. I'm sure that Barbara would approve, and I will be taking the necklace again back to D.C. One of Barbara's lessons to me was to ask. Talk with city, county, and state officials. If you don't talk to them, they won't spontaneously figure out what needs to be done. So what is needed right here and now? More compassionate hearts and voices like Barbara's. I wish you could all come with me this weekend. At least I hope you can be present in spirit. And I have a feeling that somehow Barbara's spirit will be there with me. And thank you all for allowing me to share my Barbara Ross memories.
Good afternoon. I wore this shirt for Barbara. It is in the spectrum of her colors, and I'm sure that all of you can live without me being in a suit and tie. It is a bittersweet honor to be here with friends and family of Barbara. But I am here because on a number of occasions, Barbara told me that I was to speak at her memorial service. And I've done everything that she's told me to do for 40 years. Last evening, my wife, Meg, and I went to see the musical Rent. Many of you know the song about the number of minutes we all have in a year. 525,600 minutes. 525,600 minutes. Well, it got me thinking. Barbara Ross, born February 5th, my son's birthday, 1936, died April 4th, 2022. 31,470 days in her life. To paraphrase the Rent song lyrics, how do you measure the days of a life? I have known her for 14,610 of those days, well over half of her adult life. Many here have known her longer, certainly her family and many of you friends. And there's a story, an anecdote, a piece of humor, another Barbaraism quote, or admittance of her own shortcomings for most every day of her adult life. So how do we measure, understand, account for, learn from, appreciate the lives of loved ones now in retrospect? Well, we can't fully. We can only hint at the magnitude of the impact of a cherished life well lived. But let me offer one thing to you today. Barbara lived huge. The cliche, she was bigger than life, rings just so true for our beloved. Oh my goodness, the arc of her influence, the path of her wake, the roar of her laugh, the glint of her sometimes mischievous eye, the plotting and persistence of her brain and creative approach to problem solving, the directness and softness exhibited to loved ones, and oh, the strength of her character, the resolve of her goals, the values of her service to her community, I attest today, make her just one hell of a lady. We met during a fundraising dinner for her campaign at my farmhouse in South Salem. She was late, scattered, and apologetic before laying out her values and resolve in a brilliant, down-to-earth talk. Later, the governor asked me to help Barbara set up a program to reduce the high school dropout rate in Oregon. So we worked here in Salem for a number of years. I think the governor asked me because I was the only one he knew that understood Barbara's Texas accent and could interpret what she said. We bonded instantly around all things Texas. I had lived there too, and so much more. I found her candor refreshing, if not amusing, her stubbornness charming, and we began a working relationship of unbelievable magic and productivity. She told me on the first day that she would take care of all the politics, which is an intense task in Salem, let me tell you. And I would do everything else. Well, okay. But she also said, but my number one responsibility, as she put it, was to keep me out of jail. We did. Her vision, hard work, goal focus, support, humor, unflappability, passion, and understanding of people and politics account for her being my number one boss. And we have been friends ever since. I split with a loved one during our time in state government, and Barbara turned into a yenta. A yenta meaning that she was suggesting young women that I should consider courting, as she put it. But when she met Meg, her efforts ceased. And she and Meg bonded and developed a mutual admiration society, sometimes leading me to think that I might be secondary to their friendship. So, what can we test to today about those 31,470 days? How many days were there fabulous, healthy, seamless dinners she could serve to friends and family? How many doors knocked for campaign canvassing? How many countless committee meetings? How many calls to check on people? Certainly many of you in this room. How many calls to raise money for elections, nonprofits, special projects? How many days of being a mother, a wife, fretting about divorces, hers and her children's? How many days holding and playing with kids, grandkids, and now great-grandchildren? And how many days just sitting and reading and reflecting? There were probably a few of those. But I would compare her days, the impact she had, the love she shared, the lives she changed, the values and bravery she personified, the difficult transitions she so graciously navigated, the fun she had, to anyone I have ever known or now know. She is unique. For anyone I can call a boss, a mentor, a friend, a co-conspirator, a coach, a yenta, and yes, a love. So how do we honor 31,470 days lived fully, grandly, and lovingly? I submit to you, gathered here, that thoughts and prayers would not suffice it for Barbara. If you truly want to honor her life, I suggest you work for voter turnout. I suggest you try to find a homeless shelter to help thrive. Donate to a cause of justice, women's rights, or for poor people. You can honor her by taking action, by volunteering, by donating. And those things really reflect what she would consider an honor. And as we consider what an honor it was for us to be a part of the mosaic of a life well lived for 31,470 days, may we now be graced with her memory for the rest of our lives.
Hi, I'm Barbara's daughter. I'm Serena. I'm the middle child between John and Jennifer. I want to tell you about the program for just a minute. The pictures on the back are my favorite ones when I was going through the photos of Mom. So I picked these three out. Her high school senior picture. There's a note on the back of this one that said about 27. So she's at her dining room table typing something. And this is one of my favorites, just her being a boss lady, just, just doing her thing. And this picture on the front we took 2 weeks before she passed away. So now you can understand that wistful look on her face. As adults, Mom had a running joke with my brother and sister and I that when we were little, she checked a book out of the library titled How to Raise Your Children at Home in Your Spare Time. She must have read that book from cover to cover because this is what I remember of Mom's spare time. She filled it with John's Little League baseball and later high school wrestling, Jennifer's track meets, and my ballet lessons. She made homemade Play-Doh for us, and when we became obsessed with Harold and the Purple Crayon books, she taped butcher paper up in the hallway so that we could draw on the walls and pretend that we were stepping into our imaginary scenes. One day, when I was about 6, we were out in the garden, and I was admiring the velvety sweetness of a purple iris, and Mom said, "I love iris." And in that instant, I loved iris too, because she did, and it became my favorite flower. We had Friday family nights of dinners consisting entirely of snacks. We listened to Dolly Parton records and danced as a family. We went camping every weekend, every summer for years, and spent hours at the Benton County Fair checking out every single bunny, lamb, and calf. She was the main cook in the house and cooked my absolute favorite dinner of biscuits and hamburger gravy. She also made something she called her special exotic casserole, which in my childhood memory consisted entirely of peanuts and something green. Not my favorite. At Christmas, she fixed the holiday dinners, and we each had our special recipe that we cooked with Mom. Mine was the turkey stuffing. Jennifer helped with the braided fancy bread, and John rolled cream cheese balls and dropped them into walnuts to plop into the cherry jello. It was a Texas thing. We took trips to Texas to visit Grandma and Big Daddy and the cousins, and we went to Disneyland once on the train. In my child's eyes, she had lots of spare time and gave it to us lavishly. But the twist for both her and us was that she didn't much differentiate between spare time and everything else she did. When she ran out of her spare time, she simply brought us along for the ride, and that was part of our upbringing as well. Once when I was very small, I had a terrible earache, and it kept me from sleeping. She was holding a meeting at the house that evening, so she simply scooped me up, laid me on her shoulder, and patted my back to soothe me while the meeting continued on. She was in her element, and that was very comforting to me. And so I fell asleep on her shoulder, lulled by the adults in the room plotting their political strategies. We were often out and about with Mom. I remember my sister and brother and I running around the Fish guest house when it was being painted and fixed up so people could stay there. And later we played with the household children while Mom had coffee in the kitchen with the other moms who needed help. We spent countless hours at her friends' houses creating fairy gardens in the backyard while she talked and planned and coordinated. I was sitting under the table at the exact moment when she told my dad that she was running for Benton County Commissioner. It was quite a surprise for him, but for her, it was a given. Then, of course, we went door-to-door campaigning with her, handing out literature and chatting with neighbors as she had modeled for us. Election night was special because we got to drink a celebratory, small glass of cold duck because she had won and the other Democrats were victorious that night. After she had been in office about a year, she decided it was time to wear pants to the office. It was the 70s, so she picked out a red plaid pantsuit, and of course, she rocked it. This also is from her closet. One of her gifts was caring intensely for other people. We were witness to that as children, and she brought that with us into adulthood. After I was grown and living in Portland with small children of my own, she called me up one evening and said a Corvallis homeless man who she knew, I think his name was Dan, had gone up to Portland and was not in a good situation. He needed a place to stay, and so I needed to go and pick him up. And just like that, just like with the iris when I was a child, since she cared about something, I cared about something. She cared about Dan, and so I cared about Dan. When she wanted something accomplished, she was laser focused, and that included channeling her energies through anyone that was available and that could help. I am sure many of you have felt that laser intensity. Of course, my only course of action in that moment was to act. I bundled my kids in the car and drove through the night to downtown Portland and found Dan on the street where she said he would be. And I called out to him and I said, "Hi, I'm Barbara's daughter." And she said, "You needed some help this evening." He got in the car and I drove him to a hotel that Mom had paid for. And he was safe and he could sleep, and that's all that Mom had wanted for him. Mom raised us in her spare time and in all her other time to be dedicated, kind, and compassionate people. Mom was unique in so many ways. And in some small way, I hope I can channel her. I hope I can be her proxy as she taught me to do, to care and take action and do good in the world.
I'm thinking right now, whose idea was it that I go after that? Not a good plan. Thank you all for coming. I think that my mom was an activist, and we talked about that how to honor her was through action and all the activities and stuff that we did when we were kids. She truly, truly was an activist. That's absolutely clear. By definition, an activist is a person who campaigns to bring about political or social change. On any given day, you would find her testifying before the legislature. She would go, I'm going on the train after she couldn't drive anymore. I'm going to go down and politic a little bit today. And everyone knew her as she walked through the halls. She would be actively involved in a variety of volunteer organizations, fundraising for candidates and causes. In every sense, she really embodied an activist. And she took most of us along for the ride, right? Probably everybody here went along for that ride with her. I'm sure you all have your own stories to tell of those times. But I believe she was also an activist in other non-traditional ways, in softer ways and not so flashy and not so public ways. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of those stories. She was an activist when she befriended a young woman who lived for a short time at the Fish House that my sister mentioned. That was a house for transitional housing for people who had been homeless or were out of homes for a little while. Tracy had been in an abusive relationship and was learning how to support herself and her two young sons while she lived there. On several occasions, Mom would stop by to have coffee on the front porch with Tracy. Years later, Mom showed me a note that Tracy had written to her, thanking her for those visits. She said it ended up being a pivotal point in her life. Looking back, she credited the Fish House and those visits that Mom gave her, giving her the strength to break the generational patterns of abuse. Her 2 sons are now successful business owners with healthy families of their own. It's a legacy we see, obviously, her going through. Another time, Mom told me about a young woman she and her friends from church had been assisting. Her name was Savannah. Savannah was 8 months pregnant and did not have a support network. Mom and her friends would help take care of her and just give her guidance and extra things. Mom would often chat with her on the phone, exchanging stories of the day and offering her advice. Mom made it a point to always answer her calls. I remember visiting one night and Savannah called and she's like, I've got answered. I've made a promise. I'd always answer her calls. One evening, Savannah called with panic in her voice. She was in an ambulance and her baby was dying. Mom talked with her all the way to the hospital, visited her later when the baby had died. I spoke with Savannah last night. I called her to make sure it was okay to tell her story. She said that Mom had helped her so much when her son had died, and that their friendship had also been a pivotal point for her and her family. These stories illustrate to me the campaigning she did for social life, the activist role that she took, but I also think it showed the generational change and legacy that she had an influence over. We often do not think of being an aunt, a mother, or a grandmother as activism, but they truly can be, and I think that they were in her life. Our family lived in Nevada, so we weren't around the Willamette Valley for all these activities. Serna was with her for a lot of adult activities, not just kid activities. When we were kids, she was there for a lot of those too. But we lived in Nevada, and for several years, she would fly down to visit us in December to make Christmas cookies with the kids. The phone call would always be the same. Jennifer, cookies from Grandmother's recipe are part of the holidays. I'm coming down. She would arrive a week later, her carry-on jangling with all of the cookie cutters from her childhood home, which she still has, and we divvied up right before she died. She said, these are very important cookie cutters. She would stay for 3 days, energetically supervising the measuring and mixing of the dough, admiring the artwork of the kids as they decorated the cookies. And then all of a sudden, she would disappear like a fairy godmother. The kitchen still covered with flour and sprinkles. The kids loved those times, and she always would say, I'm coming for 3 days, no more, I have too many meetings. But we love those 3 days, for sure. Another favorite memory of her grandchildren was the effort she always made to spend time with them and visit special places. After Mom retired, she had a small one-bedroom cabin, 7 blocks from the beach in Newport. She loved the beach, as you saw some pictures up here. One summer, she took 4 of her young grandchildren there for a week by herself. I thought she was very brave, but I was excited, so I was like, go for it. You can do it. The kids took walks on the beach and helped cook all the meals. She loved cooking with the grandkids. I think Alba and Yancy, you know a lot. You guys cooked a lot with her. They slept slumber party style and stayed up late eating microwave popcorn and telling stories. To this day, my kids really talk about that summer trip. They're all nodding. Well, I can barely look over at you guys. She was a powerful matriarch of our family. I mean, we really refer to her that way, a powerful matriarch of our family. She commanded our attention and earned our respect, as she had done for so many of you here in all the different areas. In closing, I wanted to share something my mom said to me in the month before her death. We spent a lot of time together in March. We were sitting at her kitchen table. She'd been telling me about some volunteer work she'd been doing and all the different stories of people she'd influenced. She paused mid-story and said, Jennifer, whenever I feel lonely, if I feel overwhelmed or am feeling ineffective, I act. Taking action is what matters. Thinking about a problem will not solve the problem. Talking about a problem will not solve it. Researching the issue can only go so far. Those things are helpful, but only by action can change be made. Mom was indeed a true activist, and I think that you're right, Ted, about honoring her through action and being our own activists in our lives in our own ways. Thank you.
I'm Barbara's son. I will refer to her as Mom this whole time. Thank you all for coming here. I'm going to talk about Mom's end-of-life decisions, and this is going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for you. It's going to be more difficult for me. But it's also a conversation that I know she wanted to have. And so my mom experienced what I think of as the perfect death. She was not in pain. She was not in distress. Her children were around her, and my mom was lucky in this. But she wasn't about to leave her departure to chance. Many of you know or may not know that she did what's called VSED, which is voluntary stoppage of eating and drinking. This topic is much too big for me to address here, but if you want to, there's plenty online. Just put VSED in Google search and you'll find it. This is a conversation that's happening right now, and Mom really, in her way, was forefront on this, really leading the conversation through what she was doing. About 6 months prior to her death, I went with her to her neurologist for a follow-up appointment. In the office, we looked at a brain scan that the doctor held, pointing to a couple areas of my mom's brain. The doctor said the little shadowy places, along with some recent memory issues and a family history, confirmed a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. As the doctor continued, there was a gentleness to her words. These were carefully chosen to ease the impact. But for my mom, this was a relief. She had finally had a definitive diagnosis. For years, she'd been complaining about symptoms that she feared were cognitive impairment or cognitive decline. But for my mom, forgetting an appointment or an occasional double booking at lunch was a big deal for her. This way, she could feel that something that she felt was wrong for her finally had a name, and that was Alzheimer's. She never showed significant decline before she died. I can't help feeling regret when I think about that her life ended when she had good years, days, months, we don't know, ahead of her. It's hard not to feel like she should be here right now. This would have been a perfect event for her. She would work the room, and then at the right moment, she would ting her glass and do an impromptu speech. However, I know that she would not feel regret. Rather, she feels gratitude. Gratitude for the many wonderful and like-minded people she counted as friends, family, colleagues, and instruments of her will to do good. Gratitude was the key that enabled her to make the end-of-life choice that she did. She was grateful for her family and community, and she was willing to leave some good life on the table to have a good death. The weeks and months before her death, she reached out to many people, and in the days before she started her fast, she had many visitors. She told very few people about her plans, not because she was ashamed, but because she needed courage. She needed to hold her courage so she could share it with me and with my sisters, so we could get her safely across the bridge from life to death. The courage my mother had was not so much the ability to face death, but to face the conversations that preceded her death. There's no mysteries to Alzheimer's. It robs the mind of reasons we do things before it robs us of the ability to do those things. This is why people live for such a long time with the affliction, and is why it's so hard for family and care providers. My mom had the courage to accept her diagnosis, and then she had the courage to face an alternative. Sometimes the hardest path is the easiest way. And my mom chose the hardest path, but the way that was best and easiest for her. I know now that it takes great effort to die. My mom stopped eating on the 24th of March. In the beginning, I expected the day to be momentous. We had planned it out. My sisters and I would take different shifts, Hospice was on board. We had a sitter overnight. Everything was ready, and then nothing happened. Mom went on making telephone calls. She went on her walks. She told people what to do. She watched Downton Abbey. Nearly a week went by. She was a little more tired. She slept. She got very nostalgic. But really, she was about the same. My sisters and I were wondering, what the heck? What's going on here? On day 9, I talked with my mom about the practice of washing her mouth out with tap water to relieve her thirst. I asked if she thought this was prolonging the process. Only a very tiny amount of water will enable the body to live for days or weeks. I told her I would support whatever decision she made, but if she really wanted to keep washing out her mouth, maybe this wasn't the time. This was a difficult conversation we'd had, but we rehearsed it. Before she started her fast, we went over the different scenarios. I asked, if you're thirsty, what do I say? If you are hungry, what do I say? We worked it out so I could encourage her while still leaving room for her to change her mind. She was resolute. From that moment forward, she had no liquid in her mouth. We decided we could use pain medication to relieve her discomfort. The last 2 days, Mom was not aware of very much. I didn't fully understand the task she had entrusted to me and my sisters until it was upon us. But this is when I fully understood the courage she had. And I understood it because she had imparted it to us with her trust she gave us, the courage to walk with her through that final stage. The meaning of life is unique to each of us. We own our story and we shape it every day with our actions. My mom showed me how we can own our death as well. She was lucky in life and had the perfect departure that she did not leave to chance.
Thank you so much for the words you've shared, the memories that you've shared. Thank you also for the permission that you gave me to share Barbara's decision after she had died with the congregation. I had first had a conversation with her about this choice about 3 years ago. And when I met her and she told me that she was going to go ahead with the choice in March, we finished the conversation I described, and then she went to make lunch for people who were coming over. That food fellowship it was so important to her, it connects to everything in her life, doesn't it? Well, food fellowship, this is a time for that now. I want to invite everyone to go to the social hall in back where the family has prepared some snacks and refreshments. You're also going to see there a table full of Barbara's awards. I am not talking about a small table. I'm talking about a long table. And Barbara had asked that people take one of those awards with them. If you see one that you would like to take with you, please take it. You do have that permission. And coming from Barbara, it's a bit more than permission. Thank you again for coming today. John.
So, as you know, Mom was a big poet fan. She had books and books and books of Corvallis poets. She did have this book too, Let Evening Come by Jane Kenyon. So I'm going to read that title poem. Let evening come. Let the light of late afternoon shine through chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needles and her yarn. Let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in the long grass. Let stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to the air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come, as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. Thank you.